Let me preface this video by saying that I don't care about Level 5. I'm not a Level 5 fan. I didn't watch the presentation. I don't really know anything about it, right? I like Level 5 because I really respect the fact that somebody is trying to put out a lot of new IPs for a child-friendly audience on Nintendo consoles, right? Level 5 does a really good job having that kind of for kids era, like Japanese, just wacky adventure, crazy, like innovative stuff, right? They try and do something for kids, and I really appreciate that. I really value that, but unfortunately, I just don't think those games are for me, right? They are after my time. So again, I like Level 5. I like what they do. I'm glad to see that they've recovered after like their huge blunder a decade ago in which they abandoned Nintendo hardware to try and become like a mobile studio, right? It's nice to see that they're trying to go back to their roots. But because this is such one of Nintendo's strongest third-party developers, right? A truly third-party studio that puts out high-quality new IPs on Nintendo hardware consistently, right? It seems as if the Twitter audience is really desperate to try and downplay what they do and the games they put out. And one of the really weird things I've seen is that YouTubers, the Twitter audience is claiming that yeah, Level 5 is using AI art in their things. Oh, like again, I don't know if they've done that. I don't pay attention to it. I don't care. But considering just how I've seen several times how like the whole AI art thing has completely fallen on its face, like I'm not going to take a bunch of Twitter users seriously in regards to this, right? I have absolutely no faith in them at all to report on something like this reliably, right? No faith at all, right? I know nothing about this. I don't want to play. I'm probably not going to play the game. I haven't watched the presentation, but I can tell you that the Twitter audience makes things like this up for clicks and attention, right? So my opinion, like again, this is a very rare like Harmon Smith opinion and not like an objective fact. Like I don't know if Level 5 has been using AI art in their game, but I don't think they did. Considering the sources, considering just like the quality of the footage I've seen, like I can't imagine that this is actually AI generated. Now, the reason I'm making this video and the reason this really needs to be addressed is that the very same people who are coming out and decrying Yokai Watch for utilizing AI art for Level 5 using AI art. Like they're demonizing this technology. They're calling it evil. Like these are the same people who came out and religiously defended Palworld when those designs were considered AI art, right? So if you're not aware of like how this happened, like initially the cope for Palworld was that the reason the designs resembled Pokemon so much was because Level 5 utilized AI art for their designs, right? And so that led to this weird like debacle in which people ignored the fact that they were actually copy pasted and tried to claim that they were just AI generated, and that was perfectly okay, right? And then eventually the AI claim was debunked, and then people like tried to pretend that Power World did nothing wrong, right? This was pretty consistent when it came to like Power World's the fan base, the behavior of the Power World fan base, right? Because people would notice something or bring something up, how mechanics were ripped directly from Breath of the Wild or Pokemon Legends Arceus, and like the Power World audience would try to say it was totally different and that like those mechanics are genericized and that Nintendo doesn't own animals or something like that. They would try and like just deflect from the actual issue, right? And this was like an issue, a situation in which like it was a deflection within a deflection, right? Because people were bringing up the similarities of Pokemon. So the initial cope was like, oh, but it's AI generated, and then like people began complaining about like the Pokemon being AI generated, and then they proved that like, well, actually they're not actually AI generated, right? Again, there are lots of situations like this in regards to Power World, right? You have that ridiculous image of like comparing Pokemon designs to Dragon Quest. And now you have like people trying to say that like Pokemon plagiarized from Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. And again, really interesting that like people are specifically bringing up Final Fantasy because Pokemon doesn't really have a lot of Final Fantasy influences at all, right? Dragon Quest did influence it in the sense like of the whole like monster thing and the concept of like treating them like actual animals, right? Like again, it was an influence. It was not plagiarized the way that like Palworld is, right? Or even the way like Yokai Watch is. Yokai Watch is a really good example of a franchise that was influenced by Pokemon, that took clear inspirations from Pokemon, but clearly did its own thing, right? I have never seen a Nintendo fan try and say that like Yokai Watch should be taken down because of its similarities for Pokemon. If anything, like people were saying the opposite, that like Yokai Watch was going to be the Pokemon killer, that it was like the biggest thing in Japan when it first came out, and that Pokemon was going to struggle for the first time ever. It was going to have a viable competitor. Didn't happen, right? For a lot of reasons, mostly level five's incompetence. But like Yokai Watch, like is a good example of what like an actual product influenced by an older brand looks like, right? Yokai Watch has its own mechanics, it has its own structure, it has its own tone, right? It has its own unique setting, right? Both of your parents are actually around in Yokai Watch, which is like mind blowing for me as a Pokemon fan, right? Again, like Yokai Watch does things differently, right? And you can see the clear influences, but there's there's such a clear divide that you would never like really think of Yokai Watch as being like a ripoff to the extent that Palworld is, right? Again, this is a good example of how Pokemon fans typically treat things like this. Pokemon fans, a lot of us did grow up watching Digimon, right? We did grow up with like other Pokemon competitors, right? Yu-Gi-Oh, right? I just watched episode 3 of Yu-Gi-Oh last night. Like again, we like other things. So like to say that like we just don't like the idea of Pokemon being competitive with Power World is just silly. Like it's just that's not the issue at all. And I really wonder how much longer like the Pal Shills can keep downplaying the fact that the real reason they're so obsessed with this brand is to try and like downplay Pokemon as a brand, to try and go after Nintendo as a concept, right? Because this is the real issue. It has nothing to do with this idea that like Pokemon is jealous of Power World, right? Power World did not outperform Pokemon, but in any capacity, but you are seeing people claim it is, right? And and it feels like the Power World narrative, because Pokemon fans don't care about Power World, they're not talking about it, they don't care about it at all. But Power World fans are talking about Pokemon all the time, right? It's created this weird situation where like Pal Shills think they can control the narrative when it comes to the way that like people view Power World, right? It's interesting, but it is starting to fall apart. Like partly because of the lawsuit, but partly because of like fans getting sick of hearing about Power World all the time, right? The game isn't even a year old yet, and we're already seeing people like note point things like this out. Notice the double standard. Notice like the behavior of these people, right? More and more people are starting to call out pal shills for what they are, like complete and utter parasites.